good to be back into practice. I was away for a little bit, taking care of a family matter, but that's been in a good place, stabilized with some treatment for the family member, and things are going really well on that front. So I've been able to apply myself more to practice in the group, and I'm really enjoying re-immersing myself in practice and study. Yeah, so my talk today is on traces of the Buddha. Traces of the Buddha. We have a nice kind of mixture in these Monday programs of all three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which is practice, study, and community. Yeah. So I realized that the study part of it is one that actually in my, even in my training at the Great Mountain Zen Center was less formal part of practice. We did a lot of practice, a lot of zazen, a lot of formal work in Dokusan, and the study came across mostly in Dharma talks, I would say, although there were some study sessions that we did over the years on various topics, but not really too structured programs of study. Our Zen Foundations class actually has a nice sort of whole 12 module series of study topics that people can jump into, and that was good for me to manage that, put that together, and because it prompted me to go and do some more formal study and to reacquaint myself with some of the primary texts and secondary texts on various subjects. So that's all out there actually for anybody who would like to dive in. We have two Naropa students or graduates. Actually, we have more than that in terms of graduates, but I guess Ansel also is a current student.
Undergrad,
Yeah, undergrad. Okay. So I taught the one Zen class at Naropa for 7 years, from 2012 to 2019, I think it was. And that was a great occasion to do more study, actually, to bring out a more formal academic study. So I've got something of that, I think, in today's lecture, is to look at some lines from the Genjokoan, traces of the Buddha. A lot of us are familiar with these famous lines from Genjokoan. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things. Okay. Then we've got another line. To be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. Okay. But then there's the next two lines are what I want to concentrate on today. And these are quite interesting, even mysterious. There is a trace of realization that cannot be grasped. We endlessly express the ungraspable trace of realization. There's a trace of realization. What's your thinking, with your all of you who are Dharma students? What do you think about this word trace? Usually it's like, well, things are traceless, right? Leave no trace is the ethic when we go. Yeah?
It's like a whiff.
It's like a whiff, okay.
Yeah, it's like you're walking in a forest and you catch a distant,
yeah.
Or you hear a bird song in the distance and you can't really, it's too faint for you to know exactly what it is, but it's there.
Yeah.
That's what I think of when I...
Yeah, that's a nice sense of the word trace that I think is what we're going to get to. But oftentimes it's kind of understood almost more like attachment, right? So like leave no trace or leave no impact. There's this quote from Rinzai: if bodhisattvas, even those who have completed the 10 stages of mind practice, were all to seek for the traces of such a follower of the way, they can never find them. Therefore, the heavenly beings rejoice, the gods of the earth stand guard with their legs, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions sing their praise. Why? Because this person of the way who is now listening to the Dharma acts in a manner that leaves no traces. right? So we have that, from our dharma. The Zen Dharma leaves no traces. The bodhisattvas, we as bodhisattvas leave no traces, right? But then, now we have Dogen. There is a trace of realization that cannot be grasped. We endlessly express the ungraspable trace of realization. So what's this all about? Well, I want to pivot now over to a koan that I've talked about before. Many of you have heard about, called Flown Away, or Wild Ducks. As the great master Baso was walking along with Hyakujo, they saw wild ducks fly past. The great master, Baso, said, "What's that?" Hyakujo said, "Wild ducks." The great master said, "Where have they gone?" Hyakujo said, "Flown away." The great master then grabbed Hyakujo's nose and twisted it. Hyakujo cried out in pain. The great master said, "When was this flown away?" So this is Hyakujo, who I talked about quite a bit last week when I talked about karma. Talked about Hyakujo's fox. Hyakujo is the master who met the spirit of the old master who had denied the power of cause and effect. He said that the enlightened person transcends cause and effect, and for this errant dharma teaching, he was condemned to live the life of a fox for 500 lifetimes. Then Hyakujo, he asked for a turning word from Hyakujo, who said, "You cannot ignore cause and effect." And this released the old monk from his attachment to the idea of transcending cause and effect. But at this point in this koan, Hyakujo is still a student and he's practicing with Baso. I find it kind of interesting. So what's going on with this koan? And this is, by the way, this is considered by the tradition to be Hyakujo's big awakening experience. Actually, he had a big breakthrough when Baso twisted his nose, and then refined that, and then became a very deep teacher. Following. The first question is, what is that? I should say, for those of you who might not be familiar with the early Zen tradition, so we now have these formalized koans that we talk about, that students work on, to understand the shifts in consciousness that happened or can be precipitated by these exchanges. And then we bring these into the Dokusan room, the one-on-one interview room, and then through that interaction, the student can have an awakening. And the teacher can have an awakening too. But back in this day, this is pretty early in the Golden Age of Zen, around 800 AD. This is how Zen was kind of transmitted and how students learned. That the encounters in Dokusan happened just in the everyday life of the monastery, right? Students and practitioners would intermingle with teachers and senior students, and they would have exchanges that would then precipitate shifts. And they're so powerful in many cases that they've been passed down as meditation stories, for us. But here, this was, in a sense, you could say it was a Dokusan. It was a question from Baso. What is that? So his first answer is okay, right? Wild ducks. He just said, names it. He wasn't distracted. He's not like, what? What's what? He was right there with Baso and noticed what was going on. But then he gets caught, as Baso says, where have they gone? And what Baso is asking for is he's probing Hyakujo on whether he has big mind, if he's activated big mind. And Hyakujo, by saying flown away, leaving no trace, you could say, Baso feels like he's missed it. So the nose twist is intended to just get him out of his head, and because he's primed with his Zen practice, he's able to realize, well, what is here right now? And the intensity of that pain actually opened him up to, you could say, this place where, well, everything is right here, right now. Big mind. Yeah, birds haven't flown away, they're right here. I'm using these words, but it's a distinct shift in consciousness. Drop away the separate self also entails a dropping away of this separation between here and there, between now and then. And it's all present right here now. So in this view, does a trace remain? It's kind of like what Seiji, you were saying about a whiff. It's kind of like, oh, wait a second, still present, right here, right now. Okay, now I'm going to bring in the Shobogenzo, which is another fascicle in the Shobogenzo. So the Genjokoan, which is where those first quotes come from Genjokoan, which is part of the Shobogenzo. And now we're going to go to another fascicle called the Yuibutsu Yobutsu. Only Buddha together with Buddha is the way it's translated. And I'm going to admit that I just was introduced to this. I'm working with one of our other Sangha members in these Dharma dialogues where we spend 30 minutes a week doing kind of a deep dive into some material. And we're working with Genjokoan, specifically with Okamura's commentary on the Genjokoan. And although I've read this and worked with it, he reminded me and brought me back to this passage that I'm about to read you, and it kind of like blew my mind again. So I was like, I gotta dig into this. So it's a few paragraphs, but just listen to this. When a bird flies in the sky, beasts do not even dream of finding or following its trace. Since they don't know there is such a thing, they can't even imagine this. However, a bird can see traces of hundreds and thousands of small birds having passed in flocks, or traces of so many lines of large birds having flown south or north. Those traces may be even more evident than the carriage tracks left on the road or the hoofprints of a horse seen in the grass. In this way, a bird sees birds' traces. Buddhas are like this. You may wonder how many lifetimes Buddhas have been practicing. Buddhas, large or small, although they are countless, all know their own traces. You never know a Buddha's trace when you are not a Buddha. You may wonder why you do not know. The reason is that while Buddhas see these traces with a Buddha's eye, those who are not Buddhas do not have a Buddha's eye, and they just notice the Buddha's attributes. All who do not know should search out the trace of the Buddha's path. If you find footprints, you should investigate whether they are the Buddha's. Upon being investigated, the Buddha's trace is known, and whether it is long or short, shallow or deep, it is also known. To illuminate your trace is accomplished by studying the Buddha's trace. Accomplishing this is Buddha Dharma. I have to take him, when he talks about birds seeing the traces of birds in the skies, I have to take him at his word. This is Dogen. He's a spiritual genius. I I mean, he does speak in metaphor, but this is not a metaphor, at least as far as I read it, right? He's saying that there's a consciousness, a certain kind of consciousness that you can literally see. What do I mean by that, literally see? Well, maybe not with like this eye, right? What Blake called the vegetative eye, it might be with a spiritual eye, but still see, the tracks of birds, of other birds through the sky, what they've traveled. Right? Maybe Basso saw that. Maybe Basso saw that. And like, what do you mean flown away? Right? Now the Buddha sees the Buddhist traces, the Buddha sees the Buddhist traces. So, I feel compelled to say here that, Dogen is constantly playing with the paradox of, well, we are Buddhas and we're humans and they're separate and they're the same. Okay, so, here the opposition seems pretty stark. Right? Human consciousness versus Buddha consciousness. But also they're not separate. But here is definitely talking about this difference between these forms of consciousness. Right? So the Buddha sees the Buddha's traces, and a Buddha sees the traces of another Buddha. They see their own traces. Yeah. And I feel compelled to kind of take it literally and quite seriously that the Buddha sees their past lives, sees their own past lives. In a full awakening. And then with the awakened eye, the Buddha can look at, another being and see perhaps how awakeness has manifested through their life. Yeah. So my experience of this, because I've been reflecting on this, and I definitely don't see bird tracks in the sky, and I don't see, other people's or my own past lives with any vividness. I don't even know if I had any. I neither believe nor disbelieve, but tend more to believe. But I can look at my own life, and I look back at my life, and I see it in a certain perspective. The more kind of awake I become in my practice, it shifts my perspective of my own past that seems to me to be quite clearly this kind of perfect path of wisdom unfolding. I would put it that way. This is my understanding of this. It's like, oh, okay, that's the trace of the Buddha, which is in me right now, of my own Buddha nature, kind of was functioning, actualizing, manifesting, coming to consciousness, almost moment by moment in various ways through the course of my life. It feels very alive to me right now. My own past has become much more vivid and clear, in a sense. I feel I can see that in others too. I can, when they share aspects of their life, I can in their account, I can oftentimes feel the wisdom unfolding, the awakening happening in their accounts of what's going on in their life. You can probably do this too. And I wonder in our discussion, maybe you can share if you have any experience of this, looking back at your life. Do you see it? Can you see it as a path of your own Buddha nature waking up? This seems to be very connected to karma for me. And I talked a lot about karma yesterday, last week. Yeah. To look at our past and to atone, with what we have done, the consequences and the effects of our actions, our thoughts, and our words. Right? It's also atoning with and becoming one with our awakening. Right? It's kind of beautiful at the end of this passage. It says, well, how do we do this as humans, right, who aren't fully awake as Buddhas? How do we do this? Well, we study the Buddha's traces. To illuminate your trace is accomplished by studying the Buddha's traces. Trace. Accomplishing this is Buddha Dharma. All who do not know should search out the trace of the Buddha's path. If you find footprints, you should investigate whether they are the Buddha's. In a lot of lineages, there's, instead of a statue of the Buddha or an image of the Buddha on the altar, there's just a footprint. Anyone seen any altars like that? Yeah, there's just a footprint. I wondered about that actually until I read this. It's like, so he did leave a trace? Why are you doing that footprint? And now I see it's like it's not about the image, which is more about the attributes, right? There's this opposition. He says here, Buddhas, large or small, although there are countless, all know their own traces. You never know a Buddha's trace. Oh, sorry. You may wonder why you don't know. The reason is that while Buddhas see these traces with a Buddha's eye, those who are not Buddhas do not have a Buddha's eye, and they just notice the Buddha's attributes. So that is to get you not connected with the attributes, right? That kind of nice, calm, erect, beautiful manifestation, whether it's a Kuan Yin or a Buddha figure. The reason we do have it is it's a very powerful kind of energetic for us in order to develop meditative consciousness. So I'm not going to take my statues off. I really like them. But we also don't want to get attached to these attributes that we apply, to that other being that isn't us. Right? We want to see the traces, and the trace is the footprint. The footprint is the symbol of the trace. What's the trace? No, I feel like I see traces, all around me. I think this building is the trace of the Buddha. What inspired this building to be built and created and decorated in this way? The smile on a person's face, on a child's face. It's the trace of a Buddha for me, of Buddha. So I think my investigation would be to really appreciate where those are coming from, where those are coming from, and then to turn that study on myself and to see, well, what is really alive in me? What is leaving a trace? What is having an impact? What is creating karma in my action, in my words, in my thoughts? And is there awakeness in that, or is there attachment in that? Is there closedness in that? Is there hiddenness in that? Is there graspingness, in that? Then look at other people's lives, but primarily kind of to look at my own life and what's manifesting. What I'm supporting and manifesting. there is a trace of realization that cannot be grasped. We endlessly express the ungraspable trace of realization. I like that whiff, Seiju. I think now we're at the whiff. You can't really grasp it. It's a subtle something that's here. Yeah, quality of consciousness that's here. Yeah. So we appreciate this and we study this and we, in our subtle, intimate practice, seek to support this and bring it forth in our lives. Okay. Well, thank you for your attention. This was a provocative passage for me, and I'm curious here in our discussion, how it lands for you. Okay, thank you.